Social psychology I. How funny we are as humans in our desire to want to fit in. Social psychology, how our thoughts, feeling, and behaviors are influenced by real or imaginary presence of other people. In primates, bigger social group equals bigger neocortex. The power of the situation. How people behavior can be altered by the situation they're in. Attribution, character of the person or situation. Fundamental attribution error. Conformity. Compliance. Obedience. Bystanders and helping. Causal attribution, what's driving the behavior of other people. Character of the person makes him behave that way, or, because they're in a particular situation. Personality psychologists equals character. Social psychologists equals situations. Most people claim that situation dominates everything. Fundamental attribution error, tendency to believe that a behavior is due to the person character rather than the situation the person might be. Even when you give the information that an experiment is 100% situational, they interpret things as being built out of the character of that person. You see something you decide what the person's character is, automatic, and maybe think about the situation, you have to think it through. Attributions. Responsible person vs situation. Social influence. A change in behavior or beliefs due to the influence of other. Conformity, changing behavior in response to explicit or implicit pressure from other. How people work together. The response of others influences your behavior. The Ash studies. Confederates people who are in on the experiment. 75% of people gave the obviously wrong answer because they fall into conformity. The more Confederates, the more powerful it is, around 4 it's the peak. But it takes one person to break the conformity, and you're willing to break that too. And mainly people fall in conformity to not feel embarrassment. Also, women on average have a bit more than men. But why? We want to be right, be popular, don't want to be weird, etc. Compliance, changing to avoid conflict. Foot in the door technique. Friedman and Fraser. They drive to homes, with an unattractive drive carefully sign, and ask the people in their house if they can place the sign on the lawn, 20% say yes. With another group. They knock on the door and say, would you sign up this petition to support legislation to reduce traffic accidents, and most of the people sign it. Then, few weeks later, you come back to the same house and now ask if they are willing to put the sign, and 50% say yes for the sign. Once you sign the petition, you're incredibly more likely to say yes for the sign. Because we want to be consistent with our behaviors. It's amazing how things start with small steps, another small step, and suddenly you're in big problems. Obedience, following the demand of a more powerful person. A little of obedience is necessary for social order. But in its extremes, obedience can become into genocide. Milgram study, 1950s. The experiment when you supposedly give shocks to another person when he fails a task. And every time he fails the voltage will increase. And even if the person doesn't want to, he will keep increasing the voltage because the researcher is telling him to keep up with the experiment. In reality the person doesn't get shocks as an actor, he screams, cry, complains, and around 350 volts, the actor doesn't say a word anymore. And 2/3 of the people went to the highest voltage. And everybody went to 100 volts. The subjects who went all the way up, wind up traumatized for many years. Berger, 2009. He replicated the experiment. 70% people went to 150 volts. No difference between men and women. So little pressure as a volunteer experiment, where you can stop anytime and walk out, he's just an experimenter, but you still go all the way. But why? Figure of authority, they must know what they're doing, it must be okay. You can't figure out how to get out of this situation. Image 40:45. Stanford prison experiment. Stanford undergraduates. They told people that they would be either the prisoners or the guards. They put them in the basement of their psychology building, where even put cells. At the end, the guards became so sadistic, and prisoners were so stressed, that they stopped the experiment that it lasted only 6 of the 24 days planned. The prisoners wind up being really depressed and anxious. Are they really bad person, or did you put them in a hopeless situation to do a good job? Bystanders and helping. Experiments about embarrassment, and how embarrassment makes us incredibly less helpful and kind to others. The murder of Kitty Genovese. She was returning to his home, at 3:20 a.m. Walking he encountered a man, he grabbed her, and she screamed. The lights went on in a 10-floor apartment building. She yelled, "OMG, he stabbed me, please help me." A man opened his window and shouted, "Let that girl alone." The attacker looked up, shrugged, and walked away. Kitty struggled to her feet, the lights went back off in the apartment. The attacker comes immediately back and stabs her again. She screams again, and many of the windows turn on again. The attacker again left. She gets back on her feet as a city bus drives by, 3:30 now. The attacker comes back again, he finds her in the doorway of her apartment, stab her a third time, with fatal consequence, 3:50 now. Half an hour later the police received the first call, they arrived in 2 minutes, but she was already dead. And the person who called, he had phoned only after much thought and an earlier phone call to a friend, and he said, "I didn't want to get involved." Later it was learned there were 37 other witnesses. The more people around who could help, the more certain you are that nobody's going to help. We won't help people, because if we're not sure what the right thing to do is, and there's people around, it's too embarrassing to do the most obvious thing. Bystander effect. We won't help people, because if we're not sure what the right thing to do is, and there's people around, it's too embarrassing to do the most obvious thing. Pluralistic ignorance. Each witness was uncertain whether theirs was a real emergency, other no react, and decided it wasn't a real emergence. Diffusion of responsibility. Each person thinks somebody else will help. E.g. 1 to 4 people over an intercom. One Confederate appears to have a seizure. If there's 80% one person will help. 3 to 60%. 6 to 30%. The more people, the more certain you are to do nothing, and it's deeply human. Not because of being selfish, it's that we are terrible at knowing what to do under unusual circumstances. And we are overcome by wanting to fit in. E.g. 2. A lady in distress. Subject waits alone. Or with a Confederate who does nothing. Or with a friend. The room is separated by a curtain. The experimenter goes to other room, turns on a recording of a fall, and moaning. If the person is alone, 70% he will check what happened. With the Confederate, practically nobody goes and helps. 2 friends, around 45%. E.g. 3. Where there's smoke there's fire. Subjects are filling questionnaires. Smoke enter through a vent. Person alone. The subject with 2 Confederates who ignore the smoke. 2 friends. Alone, 75% get up within 6 minutes. With 2 Confederates, 10% of the time. 2 friends, around 50%, if it's somebody you know, you're not going to be embarrassed. E.g. 4. A Good Samaritan. The history from the Bible says. There was an injured person in the road. First person comes and doesn't help him. Second person doesn't help him as well. Third person is from Samaria, and he helps him out. Samaritans were the poorest members of society. It's not about goodness, it's about the weirdness of our minds and not embarrassing ourselves, and how preoccupied we are with our own business. So, the Good Samaritan stopped not because he was such a good guy, it's because he didn't have so much to do. Experiment. Seminary students, studying to become ministers. They're filling out surveys about religious values. They're told to present a talk about seminary jobs, or a sermon on the Good Samaritan. Then, they're released to give the talk to another room. Either they're sent ahead of time, or on time, or late. But before reaching the next room, there's a Confederate moaning in pain, hunched over, and complaining. Personality little influence. Sermon, no influence. Ahead of time, 63% help. On time, 45%. Late, 10%. It means that if you have time, they can help him and still make their talk on time, 63% help. And it's true of everybody, all of us. Fundamental attribution error. We think a fault it's because of the person, not because of the situation he might be in.